Cohasset, and welcome to another edition of Our Town. I'm Mark DeGiacomo, and I'm here tonight, as always, with Pat Martin.
Not always. You weren't here last week.
Well, that's true. Most of the time.
Most of the time you're here.
Most of the time.
Well, with us tonight is one of our Selectmen candidates that is seeking your support, resident support in the upcoming election of May 11th. We've got with us Steve Gaumer. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Pat. Mark.
Steve, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So, Steve, I just want to start off. I think a good place is just to let people know in town who you are. Who's Steve Gaumer, and what do you offer?
I've been here in town for 22 years, sort of flying beneath the radar, I guess. Volunteering with the town for 12 now. Primarily on the capital budget committee, and then a few offshoots of that. Frankly, I'm running because I care about taxpayers and I want good government.
Steve, tell us a little about what you do for work and so forth.
I'm a financial advisor for Morgan Stanley. I've been with the predecessor companies to Morgan Stanley now for 16 years.
Okay, great.
Kids in the school? Sorry.
No, it's a very good question. As a matter of fact, I have two children who graduated came up K right through 12 with the Cohasset school system, and a daughter who is a freshman this year.
All right. Now, Capital Budget Committee, how long have you been on that?
12 years. I'm getting off for good behavior soon. So.
All right. So tell us, for the uninitiated, what the Capital Budget Committee does.
The Capital Budget Committee is one of two standing advisory committees that the town has. The first being the Advisory Committee, which generally concerns itself with all things financial for the town itself. Capital Budget concerns itself primarily with the assets of the town and the balance sheet. If you will, those are the more permanent pieces of what the town owns and what the town is. And our job is to essentially review our capital standing on a regular basis, but also review projects, review requests for replacement of equipment or purchase of new equipment, et cetera, and then advise on that to both the Advisory Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and then finally town meeting.
And is a town manager involved in that process too? Are you advising him as well, or mostly selectmen?
Interestingly enough, under the Town Manager Act, the Capital Budget Committee now advises the town manager, but as part of the representation. We make the advice to the town manager because the capital budget that's set for, well, again, by law and by regulation, is set for a year at a time and then with a 5-year outlook. That's the job of the town manager. And it's not only his job, it's the responsibility. So from that perspective, we advise the town manager based upon our views on priorities, financing, and the like. It's the town manager's job to either take that advice or discard it, but nonetheless, we'll still make our advice to the selectmen and town meeting, as well as advisory committee.
So you've had many, many years of experience, but never run for elective office before.
Well, that's not quite true.
Oh, it's not true? Okay, you're going to have to remind me.
It's a long, long time ago. I ran once as a write-in candidate for the Board of Health back at a time when the Cohasset Heights landfill was at its peak.
All right.
So
and
it was a stunning loss. It was a
yes.
terrible defeat.
Was there were enough candidates to fill the seats, but you ran as a write-in?
It was one contested seat,
Okay.
and the declared candidate did win by, I don't know, some 38 votes.
Okay.
But at the time, it was an interesting experience, to say the very least.
All right.
So
that's been a while, and now you're back. Why this year? Why Selectmen?
Well, Selectmen is a policy-making position where, as you know, capital budget has been rewarding, and we'd like to think that the committee as a whole has made good contributions to the town. But Selectmen is a policy-making position, and frankly, so many of the benefits of the town could be well distributed with clear, understood policies that direct the efforts of town hall as a whole.
So you feel that would be your area of interest to develop new policies, to put in place new policies where some don't currently exist?
I wouldn't say that it's a matter of creation. It's really a matter of understanding roles. The Town Manager Act is very clear with regard to this separation between the elected selectmen, the instruments of town meeting, and the town manager. And it's fascinating to me that no one's really paying attention to that. Regardless of whether it's the existing act or the proposed changes, those roles have been clearly stated. And interestingly enough, it didn't take power away from the selectmen, it actually elevated them. It took them out of the daily grind of day-to-day operations of the town and elevated them to a goal-setting and policy-making role, which frankly is what the instrument of the people ought to be.
But and obviously the town manager has quite a bit of power to do things on his or her own.
Right.
But the question then arises, just because they can, should they? What role, even though it's ultimately the town manager's decision, should they bring things before the selectmen to at least get a sense, to get them on board, to build a consensus? Or should the town manager just do what he or she can do under the act?
Give me an example of where you'd see that conflict arising.
Well, I think in situations like hiring, firing, those types of situations that we've seen.
Okay, so within the description I'm laying forward, an example of goal setting and policy making might be that the Board of Selectmen says or agrees and sets as a goal, which becomes a marching order for the town manager. We are going to hire people only of good character who meet specific requirements as laid out within their job description. Fair enough, that's a goal. The second part of that is a policy. And the policy it says, in essence, our role in hiring these people is to stay within our budget. The budgets are defined annually, et cetera. At that point, if you've handed that off to the town manager as the goal and policy with regard to personnel, and you realize, of course, I'm oversimplifying this, and it is the role of the town manager to hire and fire. My argument is, at that point, is should the Board of Selectmen reach down and try to manage the employee process, or should they allow the executive to do that? It's a question, but from my perspective, if you're going to have a town manager, let the town manager manage. And if you're not going to have a town manager, then that role would then fall back to the selectmen.
The most recent controversy as we sit here now has to do, and it's almost hard to say the most recent controversy because they seem to be coming every day, but had to do with the advertising for the police chief.
Right.
The Board of Selectmen, you're a close observer of all this, or most of them, majority I think, were very upset with the kind of ad that was put in by the town manager. So are you saying that they should just stay out of it? That's his job, and let the chips fall where they may? Or should he have brought them the ad and at least got some input?
I would say that, frankly, not being party to the actual process, what took place between the two parties, I would argue that in the future, you be very clear about your requirements. Historically, let's go back for just a second. Historically, ever since we've had a town manager, we've had, if you will, binary styles, starting with our first town manager, and my history goes all the way back to that one. Starting with our first town manager, we had someone who was relatively autocratic. And frictions eventually built for a number of reasons, but not the least of which was that autocratic approach. Bill Griffin came in. Bill Griffin was, by almost any Board of Selectmen's standards, and he lasted through several different rounds of voting. Bill was someone who sought consensus with the board. Next,
Even though he didn't need to.
even though he didn't need to, he sought that.
Right.
He didn't seek their approval. He kept the communication lines open, and that was a very positive thing. Steve Lombard also acted in concert with the Board of Selectmen. That is to say that he kept the lines of communication open, but at the same time he also didn't attempt to commandeer. He saw his role as being very temporary. Our previous town manager had very specific and clear-cut views as to what he wanted to do, and likewise found friction with the board. I think our current acting town manager is doing the very best that he knows how coming in a difficult situation. to attempt to work with the board. I think the board has attempted to work with him, and they're wrestling to find common ground. I don't know the exact circumstances of the police chief search, so I hesitate to comment on that. I will say, however, that I do believe it's the duty of the Board of Selectmen to set very clear-cut objectives up front, make sure that they're equally communicative with regard to what policies, or think of them as principles, under which those objectives should be achieved. And at that point, if you've got a capable executive underneath you, let that executive go and achieve it. If not, then your ultimate vote is to move on to a new executive.
But let me ask you this, okay? What do you, if that's true, and does that mean that the town can't be in the business of deciding what's best for the town? And what I mean by that is, how do you then take into consideration what some people feel like was a strong message that was sent at Fall Town Meeting about the desire to have, like, the Town Managers Act the bidding, a new process for employment be opened, and that whole thing done, and it didn't happen. Do you think people then feel like they're not included in all that somehow, or?
Well, it's again, a bit of history would help. The Town Manager Act, you both may recall this, but the Town Manager Act came about in 1997. There were some citizens who felt pretty much exactly the way you were describing it, but the circumstances were a little bit different. They looked at the Board of Selectmen as being a relatively tight-knit cabal and micromanaging the town, for better or worse, and there was a group of citizens who felt it was for the worst.
Do they always use the word cabal? Because
I picked that up from the paper.
Because they're talking about another cabal again.
No,
so
no,
I don't
no.
know,
I use that. Let's use a synonym. A relatively tight-knit group of involved folks. Having said that, the Town Manager Act passed at that town meeting with just 136 votes. So it was hardly a referendum of the town, or maybe it was a referendum of the town, that there was that little interest from voters at large. I don't know the answer to that, but to me it's interesting just to see the number of votes. However, the number of votes that carried the motion were only 14. So,
with strong opposition by the then sitting selectmen.
with strong, I believe they voted to recommend against it unanimously,
Right.
if my memory serves me right.
That's right.
The purpose of going back into history is to say that without a doubt, the Town Manager Act initially wasn't the panacea, and over time it has proven to have its ups and downs. And as an observer, and that's all I am in this case, is an observer. As an observer, it appears to me that over time it's been the case of two groups trying to find their proper roles. Simple as that. And that's not an indictment of anybody who's ever served as an elected official, nor is it an indictment of people who served as town manager. However, much the same way that the board of directors doesn't decide who's going to be the HR director in a public company.
Right.
Okay, the board of selectmen, as representatives of town meeting, of the voters, need to be respectful of what has been put in place by the voters.
But what are you going to do? I mean, if you get elected, you're going to go right into what some feel is going to be still two sides battling it out right on the Board of Selectmen. Now what are you going to do? How do you make those changes? And how do you bring those groups together?
Pat, that's a really good question. No one person can make it happen. So no one's got the magic sword in the back of their belt. However, anybody who's spent any time working with me on committees recognizes that I don't hesitate to speak pretty openly. I can hurt feelings, not intentionally, but it happens, because when I see us going awry, when we're starting to wander from our stated purpose, it's a time waster for voters. It's a time waster for taxpayers. At the end of the conversation, that's what I'm going to be pointing out. We're not doing our job. Let's get back to doing our job.
So on the Town Manager Act, if I'm hearing you right, we have a strong Town Manager Act, so-called.
So-called.
And your view is that should be respected to the letter. Let the town manager, with direction, oversight direction from the board, do his or her job and the board stay out of that because that's what the roles are.
Let me see if I can describe it in my words.
Please.
I think that the Town Manager Act is adopted. Okay, if it's revised, then it's revised by, to the letter. So, to the extent that it's a legal and binding document, if I remember right, you're an attorney.
I am.
So, to the extent that it's a legal and binding document, as you know, a legal and binding document could be attempted to be held to the letter, or there can be negotiation based upon that. I think at the end of the conversation, we have to recognize that every year, citizens go and they vote for the Board of Selectmen. There's always at least one seat up, and with that vote, the citizens are, if you will, weighing in on their evolving feelings about any number of issues. Well, as it regards our mechanics in the town hall or in town government as a whole, I believe that the document is a very good blueprint and a very good guideline that can, if you will, given that it's built on principle, can build into it a level of negotiation between the parties. But the parties have to be willing to negotiate. And I believe that the onus on that comes back to the selectmen on a regular basis, recognizing that they're in a role to set goals and set policies and allow the executives to perform at the level of expertise for which they were hired.
There's an article coming up on the warrant to make some amendments.
Right.
What is your position on that article? Will you vote in favor or against?
I've actually, I'm going to sound like Scott Brown saying I read that, but I actually did read that. I agree, first of all, that the committee, the governance committee, has spent more time, if I remember right, in terms of logged man hours in open session, looking at the conflicts within the original Town Manager Act, as was put into the Town Manager Act that was voted on in 1997. So the idea that this might be some sort of rush to judgment, I think, is a little foolish. Having said that, based upon what I read and not claiming technical knowledge of legislation, it does seem to resolve a number of ambiguities between the parties, between the Board of Selectmen and between the town manager, specifically as regards the budget process and the like. That's important. Pat, you brought up earlier the warrant article that came up at special town meeting and was voted down. And that was very specific about who would be eligible. Frankly, I think that as a town, we should always be looking to find the widest pool of qualified candidates we can. No matter what, the Town Manager Act is never about a person, it's about a function. And to reduce it to a referendum on a person is, I think, shortchanging the town as a whole, and that would be foolish.
So you supported that piece of it last time, and that piece is going to be part of this warrant article, and it sounds like you will support it.
I voted for that piece last time at town meeting, although I have to tell you, I didn't like the way it came forward. It's just a personal opinion. The Town Manager Act is not something that should be taken on a piecemeal basis, because at that point, it can begin to look as if there are interests involved as something less than what's good for the town as a whole.
They should have just waited and done it at the annual that's coming up.
I think so.
And you'll support this one?
Having read it, unless I go back and read it one more time and find a ticking time bomb in it, yes, I will.
So you talk about you want to serve the residents of the town. So do you feel like you would be the type of selectman that if you got a majority opinion from the folks called in, shared their opinions with you, that you would then support it, regardless of the issues, or no?
It's funny, I've given this a lot of thought. What is an elected official supposed to do when the job is a combination of representation and leadership? And I think that leadership comes from engaging with voters. Because when you engage with voters, not only do you hear what they have to say, but you can also help to fill in their views with maybe information that they didn't recognize or realize that could possibly inform them. I have to believe that there will come a point where there's an item that there's an outspoken number of people being as proponents, where I disagree. And when that happens, I guess that's where the rubber meets the road. I hope that I have the courage of my convictions if I disagree from a fundamental standpoint for what's good for the town, to be able to stand up and say that.
Just
I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it does, but I guess there's just one point out there. For me, it seems like the energy has flip-flopped back and forth between what I would think were the two camps. You know, we had someone didn't get elected, someone who I think the town thought was a shoo-in didn't get elected. You know, so things are flip-flopping. And then you talked about the small number of residents who usually affect town government, the same number that comes to the town meeting, which is roughly, we have sometimes a hard time getting to 200 or whatever, and it dwindles. But that fall town meeting, 450 people came. It broke a record. Why did all those people show up?
I think they were motivated, but it appeared pretty clear that the motivation at that point was over that one particular article.
Yeah, so what were they trying to say, you think? I don't know. Why was there, at least it shows there's a ton of interest in that whole issue from the town. New people.
Once again, I mean, it was interesting. That many people showed up, but interestingly enough, the difference in the vote, if you will, the winning vote was about the same as the winning vote on the town meeting, or the Town Manager Act in 1997. It was about 36 votes, if I remember correctly. So I find that probably more interesting than anything else. What are they trying to say? I believe, frankly, that those people who are impassioned by what takes place on town government here, or in town government here, are willing to speak up and speak out. I think it's absolutely necessary that those folks who are casual observers, readers of the local paper, occasionally they'll tune into a selectmen's meeting, but more importantly, show up for a single issue. They need to be engaged more, or we need to do something to engage them more, because I'm not sure that we hear on a regular basis the full opinion of the town as a whole.
We talked about the town manager. I want to go back to our existing town manager. Once again, he's kind of a lightning rod, as his successor was. And let me ask you now, if his current contract runs through the end of the year.
Right.
He's indicated on this show that he's not sure whether he'd want to renew it or not. Assuming he did, you've been an observer, you're down there. Would you be in favor of reappointing him without any search process and just bringing him back?
Well, first of all, let's not deal in hypotheticals, because as it stands right now, that's not possible. As I understand it.
Assume, I'll give you another, assume the town meeting vote passes. So the amendment to the town manager.
I believe it's two things. First of all, I think it's worthwhile to approach the current acting town manager and ask him if he's interested, instead of just ask him if he's interested. I will tell you that from my experience, and I've dealt with him from the standpoint of capital budget, so certainly much less so than the Board of Selectmen have. But I've never seen a process so well organized, so well thought out in all of the 12 years I've worked in on that committee. I know from speaking with Mike Milanowski on several occasions that there are initiatives that he's put underway, and he now recognizes that he wished he'd approach them differently. But having said that, I also recognize that this is a work ethic that I haven't seen in one human being since Bill Griffin, and that there has to be something acknowledged for that. Lightning rod, without a doubt, but I have to wonder how much of that is a person, and how much of that is the environment that we have seen now ever since, frankly, ever since the end of Bill Griffin's term, and the financial irregularities within Town Hall became apparent.
So it sounds like sitting right here now, if he were to say that he would like to stay on, you would react favorably to that.
Pat, you'd asked the question before. Geez, if you're getting flooded with calls for one point of view, and what do you do at that point? Well, this is one of those areas where I would hope that the elected officials could carry out their duties in a fair and impartial way. To answer your question, I think it would make absolute sense for us to consider him as a candidate, but people, clearly an awful lot of folks have spoken up and have indicated that they want a broader search. So I think it's fair to include him in a search process.
So you feel there should be a search, but he would be
I think
maybe an
I'm
automatic finalist? That sometimes we do that way. He should be a finalist in any search.
Actually, I hadn't even given that any thought, so I'm not going to react off the cuff. I think that just based upon his, on my observation of the work done so far, you can disagree with finer points of it, but I got to tell you, I've worked with troubled turnaround operations on a number of occasions, and this was one of the bigger ones that I've seen in a long, long time. And I have to say that I am. Personally, I think that it was handled with a great deal of professionalism, which, if, depending upon your point of view, you may not agree with that. But at the end of the conversation.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I get it. So you're in favor of a search.
I'm in favor of a search that would include Mike.
You would include Mike, and,
right.
and based on your experiences with Mike, you'd be favorable to him, but be open to see who else might be around.
I think so, and I think Mike's has also indicated that. As you can imagine, if someone's interviewing for a job and they say, well, I'm not really sure if I want this, you have to bring that into the consideration as well.
But I got to ask this question because you've made.
Go ahead, you're jumping out of your
I know,
skin.
it's like all these points I'm trying to pull together. So you made a point that you think that the more people that participate in the discussion, the better, and that we should encourage new groups to be considered and heard and get involved. I want to ask you too, with the town manager, you talk about how it looks, but you're looking at it from the outside. No doubt about it. There's a perspective from working on the inside. You can have performance, you can have excellence, but you can also have issues with personality. What do you say about the employees of Town Hall? Should they be heard? Can they be allowed to be heard? It seems like somebody should talk to them maybe by allowing them to do an anonymous review. Because, I don't know, you hear some people say that they're terrified, they don't like it, some are happy. How do you get that real data from inside there?
First of all, I bring up the same question again. Where does the role of the selectmen stop in the operations of the... hear me out, there's a reason I'm going.
Yeah, I hear you.
Should they be heard at open selectmen's meeting? No, because that'll do two things. Number one, it'll undercut the role of any town manager. It doesn't matter who it is.
That's why I said anonymous.
Okay, so let's not jump to the solution as much as where the problem lies. From my perspective, we have never had an HR function. We employ more than 300 people in town on the payroll, but there's no HR function. With that, there's no job description and there's no evaluation criteria. That to me is unfair to the employees. If you have no evaluation criteria, but you're both paid the same, one works harder than the other, well, where's the equity in that? Likewise, as within any organization, there must be some route for redress. If you've got a gripe, if you've got a complaint, there's got to be some place to go other than just directly up the chain, right? That just makes sense. But this is one of the key areas that, frankly, previous boards of selectmen have long overlooked, and that is a policy area. That is an area whereby you would look at your employees and say, gee, we need some protections for the employees. Interestingly enough, you go to your workplace and all over the walls of the break room or anything like that are disclosures required by law. Mm-hmm. We don't have that kind of organization, and that's something that I believe we need for the benefit of the employees, but likewise for the benefit of the town manager.
So even though you say you don't necessarily have to get involved to trust him to do it, if you were asked, what do you think about the plan to reorganize all the departments inside the town hall?
From my perspective, again, as an executive, that's an area where he does have authority to do that, other than to create new departments. Creating a new department requires a town meeting vote. Recall that we were talking about historic styles and the ability to work within the principles of the document without having to be at the letter of the law. That's an area where I do believe that there needs to be regular engagement. But having said that, That documentation, or if you will, that organizational chart, was initially laid out, if I remember correctly, back in September at the beginning of the budget process. And it was laid out I know it was exposed to the selectmen because we on the budget planning committee had worked with it. There were two of the vice chair and the chairman on the board of selectmen are on the budget planning committee, and I do believe that they were briefed with the initial documents on or about the end of September. It may have been a little bit later, but the point is that it's not a dramatic surprise, or shouldn't be, because it's since arisen at least twice after that as part of the budget planning process. Now, you could argue that this requires a separate focus, and that might be a valid argument. And as a matter of style, I think it's one of those things that an executive needs to bring to the forefront when it requires a big reorganization. Mark, to your point earlier, that is an area where a good executive manages up to the board, as well as managing down, if you will, throughout the organization.
Cohasset is pretty divided and has been the last several years. I think that's pretty obvious to anyone who looks, into pretty much two camps. With Bill Barnett's leaving the election today, the view is there's the two insiders, you're one of them, and two outsiders. You're viewed as part of this cabal we talked about, the current cabal.
I'm a cabalist.
You're one of the cabalists. Tell me why you're not a member of the cabal. Tell me why you're not an insider here.
What I want to know is, how am I a member of a cabal when another of the candidates has held several different committee positions and been an elected official? I'd like to know that and where the line is defined. Having said that, I got to tell you, I got recruited onto the Capital Budget Committee 12 years ago. 5 years after I was recruited on, the chairman left and said, by the way, you're the new chairman, congratulations. I have to go out and recruit people to get onto the committee. There is no waiting line. So if there is a cabal, it's simply because there's no one coming forward to join us. And by the way, that's not just my committee. I mean, look at the way the selectmen will struggle to put together an advisory committee. So from that perspective, I look at it and say, wait a minute. There's no personal gain in working 30 hours a month on an advisory committee. And I got to tell you that I've had the joy of meeting some very dedicated folks who are quite willing to say, please join this committee. We need fresh eyes. We need new blood. I don't see it, and that, to me, is a sad statement. So, with regard to the idea that the town is run by just a few people, I would argue that the town has been kept running at this point by a small group of people who are quite willing to move along.
Well, looking then at the Board of Selectmen again,
Yep.
You're certainly an observer, as we all are. Over the last couple of years, tell me something that you really think, someplace where they really dropped the ball, made a mistake. If you were on, you wouldn't have gone in that direction. If there's anything.
As an event?
As a decision, you can go back. The Coughlin situation, was that handled the way you would have handled it? The issues with Mike Milanowski, anything?
Cat dam.
Dragging me.
A lot of stuff has happened in the last few years.
Yes, it has.
And
I can give it to you from a personal viewpoint. We've collectively, and I've had the pleasure of working with chairman of the advisory committee. The last two in particular have been particularly vocal about putting process together, and I've been very vocal in the same way. The basis for sticking with process is repeatable, but people can change. So you can change out the moving parts, but the process is understood, it's respected, and that level of transparency becomes, if you will, comforting to voters. The selectmen, the selectmen, with regard to process, are supposed to make sure that nothing that has the opportunity to make the warrant gets onto the warrant without the review process being completed. So if you think about it from that perspective, if it's anything to do with capital, that the review process is complete before the warrant article is brought before them for inclusion and their vote for recommendation. Consistently, that hasn't been done. If there's any one thing that I would go back and change, it would be that, because I think a lot of the wars that are fought on town meeting floor, a lot of the arguments that take place in the selectmen's room are needless, and they're caused by, more than anything else, the inability to stick with process. And the process will save us from a lot of senseless and wasted, very late Tuesday evenings.
So that's your example of what you would think they should have done differently looking back, is just better process of getting the articles vetted into the...
I use it for articles, okay, but we made a huge step a year ago by adopting a very formal budget process along with some financial objectives. Those are big deals. This has been a difficult budgeting process primarily because of, well, any number of issues, but the net result of it is that it has proceeded at a regular and sustainable pace. And there has been plenty of time for review from all parties all along the way. So from that perspective, this piece that the selectmen have overseen has been a very, very positive thing. I'm not dodging your question, by the way, with regard to whether it's Kat Dam or Mike Coughlin. I can't even answer that because I wasn't part of it. And so to go back and render an opinion other than to say, with regard to Kat Dam, I believe that property rights are protected for both the property owner and the abutter, based upon the existing laws that we have. I believe that with regard to Mike Coughlin, for me to even open my mouth and talk about that would just make me look foolish from the perspective of not being involved in the hire, not being involved in the negotiations, and certainly not being involved in the process under which he left. So.
Okay, so no direct criticism of anything that they've done the last couple of years that
Again,
you feel comfortable talking about, that you have enough background to talk about?
The process is not a small thing. Imagine from the perspective that you're going to go write a letter, and the first thing you do is grab a pen and start writing, and you realize you've written the entire letter on your kitchen table. You know, it's very nice, but it's hard to mail. Well, the process is grab the paper, write the letter with the pen, right? It's repeatable, it's predictable, it's comforting, and it gets the job done.
So process, policy, okay? But what about personality, okay?
I have none.
That's not true.
We've got too much. But what do you say to folks who still feel it's somewhat of a personality? And this will have to be the last question because we're getting the cue. But I mean, encouraging people to come forward, and then a whole group of people that felt like someone like Martha Yesterby came forward and was treated poorly. Was she treated poorly? Is she, being bullied? What do you think? I mean, is that personality going on?
Have you ever tried to bully Martha?
I don't know.
It's nearly impossible.
I don't think it must be very hard because she's,
I've observed, and I probably have been fingered as being part of someone who has spoken out of turn, spoken harshly, and we're all human beings. That can happen, and I hope that I've been big enough, if I've been part of that, to stand up and apologize, because disagreeing with someone is part of our right and our heritage. Disagreeing in order to be hurtful just makes you a small person. That's my perspective on it. Having said that, I ain't perfect either. There's really, in my opinion, there's no room for anything other than a disagreement of ideas in public. If you have a personal disagreement, leave it personal and leave it out of the public domain. With regard to any individual, look, if you disagree with Martha Yesterby, or you disagree with Fred Cohasset, or you disagree with Leland Jenkins, or any of the selectmen now or previously serving, just remember, each of them gave up an incredible amount of their personal time to sit up there to catch your ridicule. Right? Likewise, they merit, whether you agree with them or not, they merit your thanks from time to time for just having the willingness to do it. And I say that recognizing that I might not share the same opinions, the same views, or the same outcomes on any given vote with any of the people that I named or have served previously.
Well, listen, we've got to wrap it up. We want to thank you for your service to the town and your willingness to put yourself out for selectmen,
Thanks.
and for coming in tonight. And you'll join us on the debate.
We will.
As soon as I get the date to
yeah,
you.
the question is when.
Well, we'll let you know on that. But thanks again,
Thank
Steve
you.
Gaumer. All right, that's it for tonight. So we'll be back with further candidate interviews. So keep your eyes open for them. But for now, I'm Mark DeGiacomo. For Pat Martin and everyone else here at the studio, good night.